Ghost's rifle clicked empty as he fired his last shot at a Taliban fighter who was trying to flank his position on the rooftop. The sound of the empty chamber seemed unnaturally loud despite the chaos erupting throughout the compound below. 43 rounds expended, and he could count at least 6 enemies down, but dozens more were converging on his location. Through the darkness, he could see Dr. Mitchell and Palmer had reached the eastern wall. The journalist was barely standing, supported entirely by the doctor's good arm, but they were moving toward the drainage ditch that would lead them to the rocky slopes. Ghost's diversion was working, but his ammunition was exhausted, and the Taliban fighters were beginning to realize they were facing a single opponent. Ghost dropped his empty rifle and drew his sidearm, a .45 caliber pistol loaded with 15 rounds. Against 40 enemies with automatic weapons, it would provide perhaps 2 minutes of continued resistance. After that, his only weapons would be his remaining grenades and whatever he could improvise. A Taliban fighter appeared at the edge of the roof, climbing up from the courtyard below. Ghost put 2 rounds center mass, dropping the man back into the darkness. Immediately, 3 more fighters began climbing from different directions, their movements coordinated and determined. "American dog," one of them shouted in accented English. "You die here tonight." Ghost smiled grimly as he engaged the nearest climber. The Taliban had made this personal, which meant they would focus on killing him rather than pursuing the escaping hostages. Every second he could hold their attention increased the chances that Dr. Mitchell and Palmer would reach safety. His pistol barked twice more, and another enemy fell from the roof's edge. But now Ghost could hear boots on the building's internal staircase, indicating that fighters were accessing the upper floors from inside. Within minutes, he would be surrounded and overwhelmed. Ghost pulled a fragmentation grenade from his vest and prepared to make his final stand as expensive as possible for the enemy. But as he pulled the pin, something unexpected happened. The sound of rotary wing aircraft echoed across the valley, growing louder by the second. Through the darkness, Ghost could see the navigation lights of 2 helicopters approaching from the west. The lead aircraft was a UH-60 Black Hawk, probably carrying a quick reaction force. The second helicopter appeared to be an AH-64 Apache gunship, its distinctive silhouette unmistakable against the star-filled sky. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan's voice crackled through Ghost's radio, which he had switched back on during the firefight. "Ghost, this is Reaper. If you can hear this transmission, mark your position with infrared strobe. Air support is 30 seconds out." Ghost couldn't believe what he was hearing. His team had not abandoned him after all. Somehow, Sullivan had convinced higher command to authorize a rescue mission and had returned with reinforcements. Ghost pulled his infrared strobe light from his vest and activated it, placing the device on the roof where it would be visible to aircraft equipped with night vision systems. The Apache gunship arrived first, its 30mm chain gun opening up on the vehicles surrounding the compound. Streams of high-explosive rounds turned Taliban trucks into burning wrecks, eliminating the enemy's mobility and heavy weapons in a matter of seconds. The compound's defenders scattered for cover as the gunship made pass after pass, systematically destroying their equipment and positions. The Black Hawk flared over the compound's center courtyard, and Ghost could see rappelling ropes dropping from both sides of the aircraft. 8 figures in full combat gear fast-roped into the compound, immediately establishing a perimeter and engaging the remaining Taliban fighters with overwhelming firepower. "Ghost, Reaper," Sullivan's voice was calm and professional despite the chaos. "What's your status? Do you have the hostages?" Ghost keyed his radio while moving toward the edge of the roof. "Reaper, Ghost. I have 2 American hostages extracted from the building, Dr. Sarah Mitchell and British journalist David Palmer. They're moving toward the eastern perimeter. Palmer is severely injured and needs immediate medical attention." "Copy that, Ghost. Tank and Spider are moving to secure the hostages. Bulldog and Crow are coming to get you off that roof." Ghost looked down into the compound and saw his teammates advancing with the precision and firepower that made Navy SEALs legendary. Tank's machine gun was laying down suppressing fire, while Spider moved through the Taliban positions with his rifle, eliminating enemies who had survived the Apache's attack. The difference between 8 scattered defenders and 8 highly trained SEALs working as a coordinated team was immediately apparent. Within minutes, the compound was secure. The remaining Taliban fighters were either dead, wounded, or had fled into the mountains. Bulldog appeared at the roof's edge with a rope, ready to extract Ghost from his elevated position. "About time you guys showed up," Ghost called down as he prepared to rappel. "Yeah, well, somebody had to come back for the crazy SEAL who doesn't follow orders," Bulldog replied with a grin. Sullivan convinced the colonel that leaving you behind would look bad on his fitness report. Ghost dropped to the courtyard and immediately moved toward the eastern wall where Tank and Spider were helping Dr. Mitchell and Palmer toward the waiting Black Hawk. The British journalist was unconscious now, carried between the two SEALs, while Dr. Mitchell walked under her own power despite her injuries. "How did you convince command to authorize this?" Ghost asked Sullivan as they moved toward the helicopter. Sullivan's expression was serious despite their success. "I told them we had confirmed intelligence about American hostages, and that one of my men was missing in action attempting a rescue." The colonel wasn't happy about the unauthorized deviation from mission parameters, but he wasn't about to abandon American personnel in enemy hands. The flight to the forward operating base took 20 minutes, during which the team's medic worked to stabilize Palmer's condition. Dr. Mitchell sat quietly, still processing everything that had happened since Ghost had appeared in her prison room. As they approached the landing zone, she moved closer to Ghost. "Why did you come back?" she asked. "Your team was ordered to withdraw. You could have been killed." Ghost considered her question carefully before answering. "Because that's what we do. We don't leave people behind, especially Americans in trouble. It's not about following orders or military protocol. It's about doing what's right." Dr. Mitchell nodded slowly. "David probably wouldn't have survived another day of interrogation. You saved his life." "We all did," Ghost corrected. "This team brought me home just like I brought you and Palmer home. That's how it works." The helicopters touched down at the forward operating base as the sun was rising over the Afghan mountains. Medical personnel were waiting to take Palmer directly to the base hospital, where he would be stabilized before being flown to Germany for advanced treatment. Dr. Mitchell's injuries were less severe, but she would also be evacuated for proper medical care and debriefing. As the hostages were taken to medical facilities, Ghost and his team were escorted to the base commander's office for immediate debriefing. Colonel James Harrison was a career infantry officer with 3 deployments to Afghanistan and a reputation for supporting his men in difficult situations. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," the colonel began, "you disobeyed direct orders from your team leader and conducted an unauthorized rescue mission that put your entire unit at risk. Do you understand the serious nature of these charges?" Ghost stood at attention, knowing that his military career might be ending in this small office in a remote corner of Afghanistan. "Yes, sir. I understand the charges. However," Colonel Harrison continued, "your actions also resulted in the successful rescue of 2 hostages, 1 American civilian and 1 Allied journalist, both of whom would likely have died in captivity without your intervention. Your team leader has recommended you for the Navy Cross for exceptional heroism in combat." Ghost's eyes widened in surprise. The Navy Cross was the second highest military decoration for valor, awarded only for extraordinary heroism in combat situations. He had expected court-martial proceedings, not medal recommendations. "Sir, I was just doing my job," Ghost replied. Colonel Harrison smiled for the first time during the briefing. "Staff Sergeant, your job was to follow orders and withdraw with your team. What you did was far beyond the call of duty. You made a moral choice to save American lives at considerable personal risk, and then your team made the same moral choice to come back for you." Lieutenant Commander Sullivan stepped forward. "Colonel, Ghost has always been the kind of SEAL who puts mission and teammates ahead of personal safety. His actions yesterday represent the best traditions of naval special warfare." The colonel turned to address the entire team. "Gentlemen, what happened at that compound will be classified for operational security reasons, but I want you to know that your actions reflect great credit on yourselves and the United States Navy. Dr. Mitchell and Mr. Palmer are alive today because you chose to do the right thing when it mattered most." 6 months later, Ghost stood in dress blue uniform at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, California, as Rear Admiral Patricia Williams pinned the Navy Cross on his chest. His parents had flown in from Los Angeles for the ceremony, and his teammates stood in the front row of the small gathering. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was also present, having recovered fully from her injuries and returned to her work with the State Department. David Palmer had required months of medical treatment, but he too had recovered and had written a series of articles about his captivity and rescue that won international journalism awards. After the ceremony, Ghost found himself standing with Dr. Mitchell on the beach near the SEAL training compound where he had first earned his trident 8 years earlier. "Have you thought about what you'll do next?" she asked. "I heard you're being offered a position with the Special Operations Command." Ghost looked out at the Pacific Ocean, watching young SEAL candidates struggling through surf training in the cold water. "I think I'll stay with the teams for a while longer. There are still people out there who need help, and this is where I can do the most good." Dr. Mitchell smiled. "David wanted me to give you this." She handed him a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a battered notebook, the kind journalists used to record interviews and observations. "He kept a diary during his captivity," she explained. "The last entry is about a Navy SEAL who appeared like a ghost in the darkness and gave him hope when he thought he was going to die. He said you should have it as a reminder that sometimes breaking the rules is exactly what the situation requires." Ghost opened the notebook to the final entry, written in Palmer's shaky handwriting. Day 23. Heard gunfire tonight. Sarah was brought back injured but alive. An American soldier appeared like something from a movie. Called himself Ghost. Told us we were going home. Don't know if he was real or if fever is making me hallucinate. But for first time in weeks, I believe I might survive this. Some men follow orders. Others follow their conscience. Tonight, I met a man who chose conscience over orders, and it may have saved our lives. Ghost closed the notebook and looked back toward the SEAL compound where new candidates were beginning their journey toward earning the trident. Some of them would never make it through the grueling training. Others would graduate and serve with distinction, following orders and completing missions according to established doctrine. But a few would face moments when following orders conflicted with saving lives, when military protocol demanded actions that violated deeper principles. In those moments, Ghost hoped they would remember that being a Navy SEAL meant more than following orders. It meant never leaving anyone behind, regardless of the personal cost. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan approached from the ceremony area, still wearing his dress uniform. "Ghost, the Admiral wants to speak with you about a new assignment. Special Mission Unit, Classified Operations." Interested, Ghost looked once more at the young SEAL candidates in the surf, then at the Navy cross on his chest, and finally at the notebook in his hands. "What kind of missions?" "The kind where following your conscience is more important than following orders," Sullivan replied with a knowing smile. "The kind where good men do what's necessary to bring people home." Ghost nodded slowly. "When do I start?" 3 days later, Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez reported to a nondescript building at Naval Air Station North Island for assignment to a unit that officially didn't exist. His new teammates were men like himself, operators who had proven they could make life-or-death decisions under pressure and live with the consequences. The briefing room was filled with photographs of missing persons, diplomats captured by terrorists, aid workers held by criminal organizations, journalists disappeared in conflict zones, and soldiers listed as missing in action. Each photograph represented someone's family member, someone's hope for reunion. "Gentlemen," the briefing officer began, "your mission is simple. Find them. Bring them home. Use whatever methods are necessary, but bring them home." Ghost studied the photographs, each face representing a story like Dr. Mitchell's or David Palmer's. Somewhere in the world, these people were waiting for rescue, hoping someone would come for them when hope seemed lost. As the briefing continued with details about the unit's capabilities and operational authority, Ghost thought about the drainage pipe he had crawled through in Afghanistan, the stairs he had climbed alone toward an unknown number of enemies, and the moment he had decided to switch off his radio rather than follow orders to withdraw. Some decisions defined who a person really was beneath the uniform and rank insignia. In that Afghan compound, Ghost had discovered that he was the kind of man who would walk into hell alone to bring Americans home. His new assignment would give him the opportunity to do exactly that, over and over again, for as long as there were people who needed rescue. That night, Ghost called his parents from his apartment near Coronado Beach. His mother answered, her voice filled with pride over the medal ceremony she had attended. "Mijo," she said, using the Spanish endearment from his childhood. "Your father and I are so proud of what you've accomplished. But promise me you'll be careful in this new job." Ghost looked out his window toward the Pacific, where somewhere beyond the horizon, people were waiting for rescue in places that didn't appear on official maps. "I promise, Mom. But sometimes being careful isn't the most important thing. Sometimes helping people is more important than staying safe." His mother was quiet for a moment before responding. "Your grandfather used to say that some men are born to be soldiers, but others are born to be protectors. You were born to be a protector, Marcus. Just remember to protect yourself too." After ending the call, Ghost sat on his apartment balcony and opened David Palmer's notebook again. The journalist had filled hundreds of pages with observations about Afghanistan, interviews with local officials, and notes about development projects before his capture. But it was the final entry that Ghost read again and again. "Some men follow orders. Others follow their conscience. Tonight, I met a man who chose conscience over orders, and it may have saved our lives." Ghost closed the notebook and looked up at the stars visible above the California coast. Tomorrow, he would begin training for missions that would take him to some of the most dangerous places on Earth, searching for people who needed rescue by someone willing to break rules and ignore orders when necessary. For the first time since joining the Navy 8 years earlier, Ghost felt like he had found exactly where he belonged. Not just in the SEAL teams, but in a unit dedicated to bringing people home regardless of the obstacles or risks involved. In remote corners of the world, people were waiting for rescue by someone who cared more about saving lives than following protocols. Ghost intended to be that someone as many times and in as many places as necessary. The Ghost who had appeared in an Afghan prison to save 2 hostages had found his calling, bringing hope to the hopeless and proving that sometimes one person with the courage to act could change everything. The hallway stretched before Ghost like a tunnel leading into hell. Oil lamps flickered against mud brick walls, casting dancing shadows that could hide a dozen enemies. The smell of unwashed bodies, cheap tobacco, and something else, fear, hung heavy in the air. Ghost moved forward with deliberate precision, each step calculated to avoid the creaking floorboards he could see in the dim light. Voices drifted from a room at the end of the corridor. Ghost could distinguish at least 3 different speakers, 2 men arguing in rapid Pashto, and a woman responding in heavily accented English. The woman's voice carried pain and exhaustion, but also defiance. She was alive, conscious, and fighting back even as a prisoner. Ghost reached the doorway and positioned himself to observe the room without being seen. Through a gap in the wooden door, he could see 4 people inside. A bearded man in traditional Afghan clothing sat behind a wooden table, gesturing emphatically as he spoke. 2 armed guards flanked him, their AK-47 rifles held casually but ready for immediate use. The 4th person made Ghost's jaw tighten with controlled anger. A woman in her 30s, clearly American despite her dirty and torn clothing, sat tied to a chair in the center of the room. Her blonde hair was matted with blood from a head wound, and her left arm hung at an awkward angle that suggested it was broken. Despite her injuries, her eyes remained alert and focused on her captors. Ghost recognized her from the mission briefing materials. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a civilian contractor working with the State Department on agricultural development projects in rural Afghanistan. She had been captured 3 weeks earlier when her convoy was ambushed near the Pakistani border. Intelligence agencies had been searching for her ever since, but the trail had gone cold until yesterday's intercept had led them to this compound. The bearded man behind the table was speaking in broken English now, his voice carrying the authority of command. "Your government will pay much money for you, American woman. But first, you must make video telling them you are treated well." Dr. Mitchell's response was immediate and sharp. "I won't help you with your propaganda. And my government doesn't negotiate with terrorists." One of the guards stepped forward and struck her across the face with the back of his hand. The sound echoed in the small room, but Dr. Mitchell didn't cry out. Instead, she turned back to face the commander, blood trickling from her split lip. Ghost had seen enough. Intelligence gathering was complete, and any delay would only increase the chances of detection. He had identified 3 armed hostiles in the room with 1 American hostage. The building's layout suggested additional enemies were positioned elsewhere, probably responding to the ongoing withdrawal of his teammates from the compound. Moving with the fluid precision that had kept him alive through dozens of combat operations, Ghost prepared his assault. He pulled the pin from a flashbang grenade, counted to 2, and rolled it into the room through the partially open door. The device detonated with a brilliant flash and deafening boom designed to disorient enemies without causing permanent injury to nearby hostages. Ghost flowed through the doorway while the flash was still fading, his rifle tracking smoothly from target to target. The first guard was stumbling backward, temporarily blinded and deafened by the explosion. Ghost's first shot took him center mass, dropping him instantly. The second guard was raising his rifle despite his disorientation, training overcoming the effects of the flashbang. Ghost's second shot caught him in the chest before he could fire. The commander was reaching for a pistol on the table while shouting in Pashto for assistance. Ghost could have killed him easily, but the man might have valuable intelligence about other hostages or planned attacks. Instead, Ghost closed the distance in 2 quick steps and struck him in the temple with the buttstock of his rifle. The commander collapsed unconscious, but alive. "Dr. Mitchell, I'm Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, U.S. Navy," Ghost said quietly as he moved to cut her bonds. "Are you injured anywhere else besides your arm?" The doctor's eyes were wide with shock, but she was already looking toward the doorway. "There are at least 8 more of them in the building," she whispered urgently. "And they have another prisoner upstairs, a British journalist named David Palmer. He's been here longer than me, and he's in bad shape." Ghost's mind raced through tactical calculations. 2 hostages instead of 1 changed everything. He could probably get Dr. Mitchell out of the compound safely, but adding a second person who might be seriously injured would make escape much more difficult. However, the SEAL ethos was absolute. No one gets left behind. "Can you walk?" Ghost asked as he finished cutting the ropes that bound her to the chair. Dr. Mitchell tested her legs, wincing as she put weight on her left foot. "I think my ankle is sprained, but I can manage." "What about the rest of your team? How many men are with you?" Ghost helped her to her feet while listening to the sounds of movement elsewhere in the building. Heavy footsteps were thundering down a staircase somewhere nearby, and he could hear shouted orders in Pashto. The unconscious commander would be discovered soon, and then the entire building would be searching for the infiltrator. "Right now, it's just me," Ghost admitted. "My team was ordered to withdraw when the mission went bad. I came back for you." Dr. Mitchell stared at him for a moment, processing the implications. "You disobeyed orders? You came back alone." "Sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules," Ghost replied, checking his rifle and counting his remaining ammunition. "Where exactly is the British journalist?" Before Dr. Mitchell could answer, footsteps approached the doorway rapidly. Ghost spun toward the sound, his rifle ready, as an armed Taliban fighter appeared in the corridor. The man's eyes went wide as he saw his dead comrades and the freed hostage, but Ghost shot silenced him before he could raise an alarm. "3rd floor, northwest corner room," Dr. Mitchell whispered. "But the stairs are guarded, and David can barely stand. They've been beating him regularly, trying to get information about British intelligence operations." Ghost quickly assessed their situation. 3 enemies down, but at least 8 more somewhere in the building. 2 hostages to evacuate, 1 injured, and 1 possibly unable to walk. No backup, no extraction plan, and every minute increased the chances that reinforcements would arrive from outside the compound. Standard military doctrine would have called for immediate extraction with the 1 mobile hostage, minimizing risk and ensuring at least partial mission success. But Ghost's personal code wouldn't allow him to abandon the British journalist, especially knowing the man was being tortured. "We get Palmer, and then we get out of here together," Ghost decided. "Can you handle a weapon?" Dr. Mitchell looked down at the AK-47 that had fallen beside one of the dead guards. "I grew up on a ranch in Montana. I know how to shoot." Ghost helped her pick up the rifle and checked to ensure it was loaded and ready to fire. "Stay behind me, watch our 6, and don't hesitate to pull the trigger if you see a target. We're going to move fast and quiet until we reach Palmer, Then, we fight our way out. They moved into the corridor, Ghost leading with Dr. Mitchell following close behind. The building's layout was typical of rural Afghan construction. Thick walls, narrow passages, and steep stairs designed to make each level easily defensible. Ghost could hear voices from multiple directions now as the Taliban fighters spread out to search for the intruder. The staircase to the third floor was narrow and exposed, offering no cover if they were spotted from above. Ghost paused at the bottom, listening to footsteps and voices from the floor above. He could identify at least 3 different speakers, possibly more. 2 guards on the third floor landing. He whispered to Dr. Mitchell. "When we go up, they'll see us immediately. I need you to be ready to shoot." Dr. Mitchell nodded, her face pale but determined. "I understand." Ghost pulled another flashbang from his vest. The confined staircase would amplify the effects of the device, potentially stunning enemies on multiple floors. He pulled the pin and lobbed the grenade upward, then immediately began climbing the stairs with Dr. Mitchell behind him. The explosion was deafening in the narrow space, but Ghost pushed through the disorientation and emerged onto the third floor landing. 2 Taliban fighters were stumbling around, temporarily blinded and deafened. Ghost eliminated both with precise shots while they were unable to return fire effectively. The northwest corner room was directly ahead, its door secured with a heavy wooden bar. Ghost could hear weak coughing from inside as he lifted the bar and pushed the door open. The smell that emerged made him grimace. Human waste, infection, and the distinctive odor of untreated wounds. David Palmer lay on a pile of dirty blankets in the corner of the room. The British journalist was barely recognizable as the confident war correspondent whose reports Ghost had seen on international news. Palmer's face was swollen beyond recognition. His clothes were torn and blood-stained, and he appeared to be running a high fever. "David Palmer?" Ghost called softly as he approached the injured man. Palmer's eyes opened slowly, struggling to focus. Who are you?" he whispered in a voice hoarse from screaming. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, U.S. Navy. I'm here to get you out." Ghost knelt beside Palmer and quickly assessed his injuries. Multiple broken ribs, possible internal bleeding, severe dehydration, and signs of infection from untreated wounds. Moving him would be extremely dangerous, but leaving him would be certain death. "Sarah?" Palmer's voice carried desperate hope. "I'm here, David." Dr. Mitchell called from the doorway where she was watching for enemies. "We're going home." Ghost fashioned a quick sling from torn fabric to support Palmer's most obviously injured ribs. "This is going to hurt," he warned the journalist. "But I need you to stay quiet no matter what." Palmer nodded weakly as Ghost helped him to his feet. The British man swayed dangerously, and Ghost realized he would have to carry him for at least part of their escape. With Dr. Mitchell's injured ankle and Palmer barely conscious, their movement would be slow and noisy. As they prepared to leave the room, Ghost heard the distinctive sound of vehicles approaching the compound from outside. The deep rumble of truck engines and the higher pitch of motorcycles suggested that reinforcements were arriving in significant numbers. "We need to move now," Ghost told his charges. "The longer we wait, the worse this gets." Supporting Palmer between them, Ghost and Dr. Mitchell made their way back toward the staircase. The journalist was conscious but weak, unable to support much of his own weight. Every step produced small sounds that seemed thunderous in the hostile environment. As they reached the staircase, voices echoed from the floor below. Taliban fighters were conducting a systematic search of the building, moving room by room toward their position. The window for escape was closing rapidly. Ghost could hear more vehicles outside now, and through a narrow window, he glimpsed the headlights of at least 6 trucks surrounding the compound. Conservative estimates suggested 30 to 40 additional fighters had just arrived, turning their desperate situation into something approaching impossible. "There's another way out," Dr. Mitchell whispered urgently. "There's a window on the 2nd floor that opens onto the roof of the outer building. David told me about it yesterday." Ghost weighed their options quickly. The main staircase was compromised, but a roof exit might allow them to avoid the searchers inside the building. However, it would put them on the compound's outer perimeter where they would be visible to the newly arrived reinforcements. "Show me," Ghost decided. They made their way to the 2nd floor, Palmer becoming heavier with each step as his strength faded. The window Dr. Mitchell had mentioned was barely large enough for a person to squeeze through, and the drop to the roof below was at least 8 feet. For healthy individuals, it would be manageable. For injured hostages, it was treacherous. Ghost looked out at the compound courtyard and surrounding area. The new arrivals had indeed surrounded the building, but they were focused on preventing escape through ground-level exits. The rooftops appeared unwatched, at least for the moment. "I'll go first, then help Palmer down," Ghost explained. "Dr. Mitchell, you come last, and close the window behind us." Ghost squeezed through the narrow opening and dropped to the roof below, his knees absorbing the impact. The roof was flat and constructed of packed earth over wooden beams, typical of Afghan rural architecture. It would support their weight, but any sudden movement might create noise that would alert the fighters below. Palmer's extraction proved more challenging. The injured journalist had to be lowered carefully to avoid further injury, and his suppressed groans of pain seemed unnaturally loud in the night air. Ghost caught him and eased him down onto the roof surface, then helped Dr. Mitchell make the descent. From their position on the roof, Ghost could see the full scope of their problem. The compound was now surrounded by armed men, with vehicles blocking all ground-level exits. Spotlights swept the walls and gates, making movement across open areas impossible. Their only advantage was that the searchers were still focused on the building they had just escaped. "How do we get out of here?" Dr. Mitchell whispered. Ghost studied the compound's layout, looking for any weakness in the surrounding security. The eastern wall, where he had originally entered, was the lowest point of the perimeter and backed up against the steep mountainside. If they could reach that wall without being detected, they might be able to climb over and disappear into the rocky terrain. The challenge was crossing 50 meters of open courtyard while carrying an injured man who could barely walk. Even with the darkness providing some concealment, the distance was too great to cover without being spotted. Ghost made another decision that violated every principle of sound tactics. Instead of trying to sneak past the searchers, he was going to create a diversion that would draw their attention away from the escape route. "When I start shooting, you help Palmer get to the eastern wall," Ghost told Dr. Mitchell. "There's a drainage ditch that runs along the base. Follow it north until you reach the rocks. Then, climb as high as you can and wait for me." Dr. Mitchell understood immediately what he was proposing. "You're going to take on 40 men by yourself while we escape? That's suicide." Ghost checked his remaining ammunition and grenades. "I'm not planning to fight them all. I'm planning to make them think there are more of us than there really are. Keep them busy long enough for you to get clear." Before Dr. Mitchell could argue further, Ghost moved to the edge of the roof and began his one-man assault on the Taliban reinforcements. His first shots targeted the spotlights, plunging sections of the compound into darkness. His second shots took down sentries who were silhouetted against vehicle headlights. The compound erupted in chaos as fighters scattered for cover, shouting orders and returning fire at muzzle flashes they could barely see. Ghost moved continuously, changing position after each shot to create the illusion of multiple snipers operating from different locations. From the corner of his eye, he could see Dr. Mitchell helping Palmer across the courtyard toward the eastern wall. They moved slowly but steadily, taking advantage of the confusion and darkness his diversion had created. Ghost's ammunition was running low, and the Taliban fighters were beginning to organize their response. Soon they would realize the attack was coming from a single shooter, and then they would overwhelm his position through sheer numbers. But as he prepared for what might be his final stand in this remote Afghan valley, Ghost felt a deep satisfaction. Dr. Mitchell and Palmer would escape. 2 Americans would go home to their families instead of dying in captivity. Whatever happened to him now, the mission would be successful where it mattered most. The mountains of eastern Afghanistan stretched endlessly in every direction, their jagged peaks cutting sharp lines against the pre-dawn sky. Staff Sergeant Marcus "Ghost" Rodriguez pressed his body against the cold rock face, his breathing controlled and steady despite the thin air at 8,000 feet. Through his night vision goggles, the world appeared in shades of green and black, every shadow a potential threat. The mission had started 3 days ago with what seemed like routine intelligence. A high-value target, Taliban commander Khalil Haqqani, was reportedly hiding in a remote compound near the Pakistani border. The compound sat in a narrow valley, surrounded by steep cliffs and accessible only through a single mountain pass. It was the kind of place where men like Haqqani felt safe, believing the terrain itself would protect them from American forces. Ghost's team, SEAL Team 7, had been tasked with a surgical strike. Get in, capture or eliminate the target, gather intelligence, and get out before anyone knew they were there. The mission briefing had been straightforward, the kind they had executed dozens of times before in the mountains and valleys of Afghanistan. Lieutenant Commander Jake Reaper Sullivan led the 8-man team. At 34, Sullivan had more combat deployments than most soldiers twice his age. His reputation for bringing his men home alive was legendary among the SEAL community. Beside him crouched Petty Officer First Class David "Tank" Washington, a massive man whose gentle demeanor off the battlefield contrasted sharply with his efficiency as a heavy weapons specialist. The team had inserted via helicopter 48 hours earlier, landing in a clearing 15 miles from the target compound. They had moved through the mountains like ghosts, using ancient goat paths and dried riverbeds to avoid detection. Each man carried nearly 80 pounds of gear, weapons, ammunition, and supplies needed for the 3-day operation. Ghost checked his watch. 0430 hours. In 90 minutes, the sun would begin to rise over the eastern peaks, and their window for a stealth approach would close. The plan called for them to be in position overlooking the compound by 0500, with the assault beginning at 0530 during the last minutes of darkness. Through his scope, Ghost could see the compound 800 meters below. The intelligence reports had been accurate. Born in East Los Angeles to immigrant parents, he had joined the Navy to escape the cycle of poverty and violence that claimed many of his childhood friends. The path to becoming a Navy SEAL had nearly broken him. Hell Week during basic underwater demolition training pushed men beyond their physical and mental limits. While stronger candidates rang the bell and quit, Ghost endured through pure determination. His instructors noted his unusual ability to remain calm under extreme stress and his talent for making split-second decisions under pressure. Now, as he watched the compound through his rifle scope, those skills would be tested again. Something about this mission felt different from the beginning. The intelligence had come through unusual channels, and the timeline for execution had been compressed from the normal planning cycle. When Ghost raised these concerns during the mission briefing, Sullivan had assured him that higher command had verified all information. Movement on the north wall, reported Petty Officer Second Class Tommy Spider Chun from his position 300 meters to Ghost's left. Chun, a demolitions expert from San Francisco's Chinatown, had an eye for detail that made him invaluable for surveillance operations. Ghost adjusted his scope and spotted 2 guards walking along the compound's northern perimeter. They moved casually, weapons slung over their shoulders, talking quietly as they walked. These were not the alert, professional movements of experienced fighters. They looked more like farmers or shopkeepers playing at being soldiers. "Reaper, this is Ghost," he whispered into his radio. "Something's not right down there." The guards looked inexperienced. "This doesn't match the profile for Haqqani's security detail." Sullivan's response was immediate. "Ghost, we proceed as planned. Intelligence indicates target is present. We cannot abort based on speculation." The assault team began their descent toward the compound. 4 SEALs would breach the main gate while the other 4 provided overwatch and cut off potential escape routes. Ghost remained in his elevated position, his rifle trained on the compound's main building where thermal imaging suggested the largest concentration of people. As the team moved into position, Ghost noticed movement in the mountains to the east. Through his scope, he could see what appeared to be more guards, but their positions made no tactical sense. Instead of watching potential approach routes, they seemed to be looking toward the compound itself, as if they were observing rather than protecting. "Reaper, Ghost, I have multiple contacts on the eastern ridge. They're not positioned for perimeter security. They appear to be watching the compound, not protecting it." Sullivan's voice carried a note of irritation. "Ghost, maintain overwatch. Do not engage unless directly threatened. Assault team is moving to breach." The next few minutes unfolded with the precision that made Navy SEALs legendary. The 4-man assault team reached the compound wall without detection. Spider placed shaped charges on the main gate, while Tank positioned himself to provide covering fire. The other two team members, Petty Officer First Class Rick Bulldog Martinez and Petty Officer Second Class Alex Crow Thompson, prepared to clear the buildings once the breach was made. Spider's charges detonated with a sharp crack that echoed off the valley walls. The assault team flowed through the breach like water, their movements coordinated through hundreds of hours of training. Within seconds, they had secured the outer courtyard and were advancing toward the main building. That's when everything went wrong. The compound erupted in automatic weapons fire, but not from the guards they had been watching. The shots came from concealed positions in the buildings, from hidden bunkers, and from firing ports cut into the compound walls. The Taliban fighters inside were not the inexperienced men Ghost had observed on patrol. These were seasoned veterans who had turned the compound into a carefully prepared kill zone. Contact front. Tank's voice boomed over the radio as his machine gun opened up, sending streams of tracer rounds into the compound. Multiple shooters in the main building. Spider threw himself behind a low wall as bullets sparked off the stones around him. "This is a setup," he shouted. "They knew we were coming." Ghost immediately shifted his focus to providing covering fire for his teammates. Through his scope, he could see muzzle flashes from at least 8 different positions inside the compound. The thermal imaging had missed most of the defenders because they had been positioned in specially prepared hides designed to mask their heat signatures. "Reaper to all call signs." Sullivan's voice was calm despite the chaos erupting below. "Withdraw to Rally Point Alpha. This is not the intelligence picture we were briefed on." But withdrawal was easier ordered than accomplished. The assault team was pinned down in the compound's courtyard, caught between the main building and the outer wall. Every attempt to move resulted in concentrated fire from multiple positions. The Taliban fighters had clearly been expecting them and had prepared accordingly. Ghost began engaging targets systematically, his rifle finding Taliban fighters in their concealed positions. His first shot took down a machine gunner who had Tank pinned behind a water well. His second shot silenced a sniper in the main building's second story who had been targeting Spider. "Ghost, this is Bulldog." Martinez's voice was tight with pain. "I'm hit. Can't make it to the rally point." Through his scope, Ghost could see Martinez lying behind a pile of construction materials, dark stains spreading across his uniform. Tank was trying to reach him, but machine gun fire from the main building made movement impossible. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The assault team was pinned down with a wounded man, surrounded by more enemies than intelligence had indicated, and the sun would be rising soon, eliminating their night vision advantage. Standard operating procedure called for immediate withdrawal when a mission went this badly wrong. "All call signs, Reaper." Sullivan's voice carried the authority of command. "We are aborting this mission. Withdrawal to Extraction Point Bravo." "Ghost, provide covering fire for the assault team's movement." Ghost understood the logic behind the order. They were outnumbered, surprised, and had lost the element of stealth. Continuing the mission would likely result in more casualties with no guarantee of success. Military doctrine was clear. When a mission was compromised to this extent, the priority became saving the team rather than completing the objective. But as Ghost prepared to provide covering fire for his teammates' withdrawal, he noticed something that changed everything. Through his scope, he could see into the main building's second story, where thermal imaging showed a cluster of heat signatures. One of the figures was clearly different from the others, larger and moving with the measured pace of someone giving orders rather than following them. More importantly, Ghost could see that this figure was restraining another person, someone whose heat signature suggested they were bound and possibly injured. The intelligence briefing had mentioned that Haqqani might be holding American hostages, contractors, or aid workers who had been captured in recent weeks. If Ghost was right, they weren't just abandoning a failed mission. They were abandoning American prisoners. "Reaper, Ghost," he whispered into his radio. "I have eyes on possible hostages in the main building, second floor. One appears to be American, possibly wounded." Sullivan's response was immediate and final. "Ghost, that is not confirmed intelligence. We are withdrawing now. That is a direct order." Ghost watched through his scope as his teammates began their fighting withdrawal from the compound. Tank was laying down suppressing fire while Spider and Crow attempted to reach Martinez. The wounded SEAL was trying to move on his own, but his injuries were clearly severe. The smart thing to do was follow orders. Ghost was a staff sergeant, not the team leader. Sullivan had more experience and access to intelligence that Ghost might not have. Military discipline demanded that he provide covering fire and help his team withdraw safely. But something deep in Ghost's training as a Navy SEAL rebelled against the idea of leaving Americans behind. The SEAL ethos was clear: I will never quit. I will never leave a fallen comrade. If those were American hostages in the building, abandoning them violated everything he had sworn to uphold. Ghost made a decision that would either save lives or end his military career. Instead of providing covering fire for the withdrawal, he began moving down the mountain toward the compound. His plan was desperate and probably suicidal, but it was the only chance those hostages had. "Ghost, what's your position?" Sullivan's voice crackled through the radio. Ghost switched off his radio. He could not afford to be ordered to stop, and he could not afford to argue with his commanding officer during a firefight. Whatever happened next, he would face the consequences alone. Moving with the stealth that had earned him his nickname, Ghost worked his way down the rocky slope toward the compound's eastern wall. The Taliban fighters were focused on the Americans in the courtyard and had not established proper security on their flanks. It was a mistake that Ghost intended to exploit. The morning sky was beginning to lighten, and Ghost could hear his teammates' gunfire growing more distant as they withdrew toward the extraction point. Within minutes, he would be completely alone in enemy territory, cut off from support, and facing overwhelming odds. As he reached the base of the compound wall, Ghost could hear voices from inside speaking in Pashto. The tone was urgent, and he caught enough words to understand that the Taliban commander was giving orders to move the prisoners. If Haqqani escaped with the hostages, they might never be found again. Ghost checked his equipment one final time. He had his rifle, his sidearm, for fragmentation grenades, 2 smoke grenades, and enough ammunition for perhaps 10 minutes of sustained fighting. Against at least 12 enemies in prepared positions, it should have been hopeless. But Ghost had one advantage that the Taliban fighters could not have anticipated. They were expecting to fight a retreating SEAL team, not a single operator conducting a solo rescue mission. Their attention was divided. Their positions were designed to repel an assault from the courtyard, and they believed the Americans were already withdrawing. Ghost found a drainage pipe that ran under the compound wall, probably used to channel rainwater from the courtyard during the brief mountain rainy season. The pipe was barely wide enough for a man, but it would allow him to enter the compound without being seen. As he crawled through the narrow space, Ghost could hear gunfire above him growing more sporadic. His teammates were successfully withdrawing, which meant he would have to complete this mission entirely on his own. There would be no backup, no extraction, and no support if things went wrong. Emerging from the drainage pipe, Ghost found himself in a small storage area beneath the main building. Stone steps led upward toward the area where he had seen the thermal signatures. He could hear voices directly above him, some speaking in Pashto and others in what sounded like English. Ghost began climbing the stairs, his rifle ready, and his senses alert for any sound that might indicate detection. Each step brought him closer to either rescuing American hostages or walking into a trap that would end his life in this remote Afghan valley. At the top of the stairs, a wooden door stood partially open, revealing a narrow hallway lit by oil lamps. Ghost could hear voices more clearly now, and his heart rate increased as he recognized words being spoken in American accented English. There were definitely hostages in the building, and they were alive. The question now was whether one man could rescue them from a building full of armed Taliban fighters, get them safely out of the compound, and somehow reach friendly forces before being overwhelmed. Everything Ghost had learned in 8 years as a Navy SEAL would be tested in the next few minutes. As he prepared to enter the hallway, Ghost thought briefly of his teammates, now safely withdrawing toward the extraction point. They would report him as missing in action, probably killed attempting an unauthorized rescue mission. His parents would receive a folded flag and a letter explaining that their son had died serving his country. But as Ghost heard what sounded like an American woman's voice pleading in English, he knew he had made the right choice. Some things were more important than following orders, and leaving Americans in enemy hands was not something he could live with. Ghost stepped into the hallway, his rifle raised and ready. Whatever happened next, he was committed to seeing this mission through to the end.